I think we have quorum, Joey?
We do. Yep.
Okay. Then I will call this meeting to order at 5:30 p.m. We will go over roll call. So Greg is here, Stephanie, Joffrey, Bjorn, Naif, and Sean. Rihan will come in late. Other than that, for now absent is Andrea, Judy, Feng Nguyen, and I believe, is that the remaining people?
I think you got them all.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, then we can move to the agenda approval. Is there any discussion about the agenda today? Seeing none, can I entertain a motion?
A motion.
Motion by Stephanie. Any seconds? Seconded by Joffrey. And I did see Andrea come into the meeting now, so there would be 1, 2. Oops, sorry, screens are moving. Motion or all those in favor? Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes 7-0-0.
And just so you know, Deanna, I don't know if Bjorn was able to vote. His thing keeps saying connecting to audio, so I think he'll.
We'll say 6-0.
Just so you know, if we reference to him, he may not be able to respond to us until that gets resolved.
Okay, then for now 6-0-0. Then we can move on to the approval of last week's minutes. If you all have taken a look at that, I will open up for any discussion. See no discussion. Can I entertain a motion to approve last week's minutes? I see Judy. I don't seem to, so I see Judy make a motion. Any second?
I second.
Andrea seconds. And so including Judy, we'll be back to 7, but all those in favor of approving last week's minutes? All opposed? Any abstentions? I see Greg abstaining. I see. Okay. Motion passes 6-0-1. Moving forward with the reports, I do not have any, so I will pass it off to Joey and Lacey.
I do not have any reports today.
Only thing I have is just a thank you to everyone for being here and making sure we had quorum to get started on time. And I see Bjorn's connection looks like it's working, so he is here now on that side. So I just want to say thank you to everyone on that. Also, I appreciate all the time you all are putting into these program reviews that are out there. And so I know we'll go into another batch of them tonight and have some discussion. But other than that, I hope the quarter is going well for everyone.
Thank you, Joey. Joffrey, do you have any reports?
I do not have a report.
All right, then we can move on to other business. And I see there seems to be no communications received. All right, then we can move to first call for public comment. Joey?
I'm just putting this out here and Joffrey may jump in to add on to it. But just as a reminder, especially to all of our students on the committee and any watching it later, the ASCW elections are going on this week. And so if you haven't had the chance, make sure you go check those out and vote. And then I believe the ASCW, the Student Senate elections are coming up this weekend as well. And so just to put that on people's radars if you don't have that already.
Yeah, the election is coming in May, so you all know. Thank you for everyone who has voted already.
All right, thank you. We can move forward with new business, but looking at the agenda, there's no new business. So then we can get started with old business with our program reviews.
Yeah, and so I'll jump in, and similar to what we did last week, especially for those of you who were here, but as a refresher for those who weren't, we'll kind of go through each one of these. If there's any questions that you all have, any feedback, things along those lines, one, it'll be on record, obviously, so those areas can come back and review them later. But as you all saw in looking at the minutes, thank you, Peggy, for diligently keeping track of all of our comments and feedback. And at the end of all our program reviews, we're going to send those out to all the units. As we did last week, we'll start off with similarly, if there's any feedback or comments you all have in general, not to a specific program that's on there, and then we'll go through each of them. I know similar to last week, at least on my end, with some of the same things about being specific and answering the questions. The one I noticed more this week, probably because last week was mostly ACW, so theirs was consistent, is most of the responses to question 9 about have there been any impacts with budget reductions. Most of those answers were what could happen with budget reductions. And so just wanted to make sure they're giving some feedback on have there been any impacts already, because that's what the question's asking. But any other just kind of general things you all have seen across them that you want to provide feedback on? Bjorn?
It occurred to me as I was looking through, it might be helpful if we knew, as a result of the 5% budget cuts this year, where exactly, like which departments lost funding and possibly in which areas of those departments, because that would help us, I think, evaluate more effectively, kind of see the picture.
Lacey, did you want to kind of touch on that? And this is for you're talking for this fiscal year, Bjorn, right? When we had those in the fall.
Yeah, I mean, next year it may be relevant again but for this year, yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's a really good question that we can potentially send out to all the base funded areas. I will say not all of them knew what that 5% was going to look like. Because as a kind of a refresher, we said a 5% at the divisional level. And a lot of these program reviews were actually filled out by either program managers or directors. And so that decision didn't always make it all the way down at that point before it was before this deadline came out. So there's a lot of basically unknowns at this point, but I do think it's a really good question that we could potentially follow up, because they should have that in the next, be able to answer that before summer.
Would it be possible to send that out? Well, ask the divisional leadership what cuts they made, or because that might be more efficient than like asking every single base funded area if they had a cut and what the cut was. But asking the base funded areas also gets us a better picture of how that might be starting to affect them. Like there's kind of a duality there.
Yeah, I think it would make more sense to have a kind of an answer from a divisional standpoint when it comes to like a blanket answer. I will say when you get into the program reviews, you will see some of the program reviews highlighting what some of those budget impacts are. It's not necessarily across the board, and it doesn't necessarily stick out like the 5%, but they do talk about it. And so in general, we did meet our 5% target for fiscal 22. Gotta remember which fiscal year I'm in right now. And a lot of that came from either salary savings or efficiencies on programming. And so there's a lot of collaboration, and when that happens, sometimes the funding, the expenses are less, and that's pretty much what ended up happening. So that's kind of the, 20,000 foot answer to that question. But I do think we could follow back up with the divisional leaders and see if we can get them to give us some information that maybe is a little bit more detailed.
And in that same vein, Bjorn, I think that's also where the clarification on that question is helpful as they're filling it out, because the question really is what impacts have there been, if there are any. and again, as Lacey referenced, you'll see others coming up. Not everyone had the struggles that I was talking about. Some answered it exactly and talked about here's what the reduction in the impact was. I just noticed a lot of them this week that we're looking at answered in the hypothetical of this would be the impact if there was a reduction within that. So I think some of those you'll see as we look at the program reviews where they touched on what those were. But that's a great point. Other general kind of feedback or things you all noticed? I did have one question that was sent to me on a couple of them from one of the committee members that was really talking about on question 2. And I think if my memory serves correctly, we had talked about this last week as well. But it's really the second part of question 2. How are you assessing the effectiveness of the program? And similarly, commenting on some of these weren't specific in how they were assessing it. They'd say what their goal was, but not how what they were doing assessed if they were meeting the goal. And so again, I think that's just general feedback we'll give to everyone for when they do the program reviews for next year is, can you please be specific in how that is? And if they're not assessing that, to kind of give them that feedback as well, it would be helpful if they are doing something to look at that. So. Okay, well, with that, we'll just kind of go through these individually. Again, it's going to be different than last week because as you all remember last week, with the exception of the admin support, was all the ACW, which are similar. And as you all can see this week, they're very different programs, each one of them. And so we'll start off just with campus activities. Any questions, concerns, feedback from their program review? Bjorn?
Yeah, I had a couple. The first one, they just mentioned student programmers on question 2. I was just wondering how many student programmers were employed. Should I just list all my questions? Okay.
Go for it, Bjorn.
The other question 3, usually covers like overlaps and intersections. I don't think they listed any. I was just interested to see if there are lots of intersections or collaborations, that kind of thing. Question 6 made me ask if there's a campus activities equivalent for online or center students, because they mentioned they were servicing Ellensburg community and like on-campus students. And number 7, they mentioned they couldn't easily take data for large events because presence is difficult. I saw that trend on actually a couple. Presence is difficult. Was wondering if there was some kind of informal count that they could do, like head count, but that doesn't seem super important to take. Those are my questions.
I could be wrong, Bjorn, but just to touch on that last one, I believe they do on those large scale events do a head count. Because I think we've gotten some of the, I think that's where I was reading it is they can't get that more specific to know unique students, what the demographic, what those pieces are within it. But no, those are great questions and feedback. Yeah. Judy?
Yeah, I just want to add, can everyone hear me okay? I've been having mic issues. Okay, perfect. I just want to add, yeah, they with presence check-in, they don't really get a lot of information besides the fact that the person has a student ID number. And even when you go into the presence portal, there's just a lot of limitations. So yeah, it is a little difficult using presence, and given it's something that our campus uses like kind of more or less throughout campus for programming, it's just kind of difficult to like fully, keep things on the same page and also use a program that's, optimized perfectly. So.
Joffrey?
On number 6, it says they tackle, they work majorly with the Ellensburg residential students, and I wonder if there's a base funded area specifically for the west side that also works in a similar field, maybe the west side CAT team or whatever, and if not, why is that? Why do they tackle specifically the main campus students as opposed to the center campus students. And as everyone knows that even center students pay into some of those fees too. So.
And I think with that, that may be another one too that kind of goes to, I think you had pointed out, Bjorn, that question about are there overlaps or intersections with other programs that may be similar? If there is a similar one, that would have been helpful on there. And I think, Lacey, I saw your hand go up and down.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I think those are all really good questions, but I wanted to, Joffrey made a comment that I wanted to touch base on is the West Side, we do have a West Side student activities. I was looking for the words that I was trying to say, budget as well. And so I think that'll be interesting to see how those tie together because they are supposed to be kind of mirrored in some ways. They're different, but the funding is supposed to be dedicated to student activities on the West Side from that budget.
Other comments, questions, feedback on campus activities program review? I'm going to go with Andrea's shaking head no and move on to the next one then. We'll take a look at community garden at Wildcat Farm. Questions, feedback? Bjorn?
Question 3 was a minor one. Kate mentioned some organizations that they like interact with, like Slice and the assorted food banks. I was wondering if we could get a little more detail on how they interact, like whether we're talking about an overlap kind of thing or an interact kind of thing. The other question I had was there was a mention of like professional staff time, and I don't really know what professional staff time means in this context. That was question 10. A little bit of clarification. I'm not really understanding.
And I can put it in there because I think that's good feedback for them, Bjorn. Because again, they're going to be filling this out. I can share with you all professional staff time is Kate's time. As that now, our S&A money doesn't fund her position. However, she is the one funded through other areas of the university, but I can't tell you what funding. I want to say it's state. It may be something different. It's not S&A funded though. Her position, and so it's really referring to her position as the sole professional staff coordinating that. But that would be helpful because someone else looking at this, again, that's posted online, wouldn't know what that means. Any other?
I was trying to raise my hand, but I couldn't figure it out. For number 2, I'm not sure how, I want to say like how much they're planning to do this, but they did mention like an outdoor pizza oven as if like for use like funds for that. So I guess if they were actually like serious about that, I would want to know more why they chose that. They did mention like an opportunity to engage with like the students and anyone or everyone who's involved, but it's like, why a pizza oven? What plans are there around that? I just thought it was kind of random. But yeah, that's my feedback on that.
Lacey?
Yeah, just a little bit of historical context for you on that one is that actually has to do with their original base funding proposal that was quite a few years ago. So it was part of the request that they were thinking of about in if I remember correctly, it had to do with like engagement. But I do think that it's a really good question because it's kind of been lost in the wayside with all of the materials. And so it would be good to be able to have that in one place.
Thank you for the clarification. I think it would be good for them to like kind of bring that history up, I guess, in a way. I think it will help them like achieve like actually getting it. So yeah.
And that's great feedback, because again, otherwise it seems kind of odd. Why would you come up with that? Was it from feedback? Was it from something else? Joffrey?
Number 6, I provide detailed information regarding what utilizes your program. It talks about multi-generational and multicultural. I didn't understand that part of multi-generational. Does it mean that a child who went to Central, then their parents can also come and use the facility? I didn't understand that part.
I think that's definitely, I know what the word means, Joffrey. I don't know what they were using in this context as well. So I don't want to make an assumption. So I think that's something we can clarify.
Yeah, to add to that, they did also kind of put in there like if multi-experiential is a word. So I thought it was like a funny comment, but at the same time, it's like, okay, like, can you clarify what that means?
I will say I did appreciate on question 7, where they touch on, again, that they don't really collect exact numbers, but they plan to be much more careful with data collection to help with responses. And so I think that's something obviously we'll look at next year to see. You said you were going to do it, did you? But I liked seeing that they kind of recognize that themselves and are planning on it. Any other feedback, questions, community garden? Okay, we'll go ahead and jump into the West Side Career Counselors.
Oh, Joffrey, did you have a question to
Sorry.
add?
Yeah. Still on 9, I still, like you said, it's pretty future. It talks about, the future impact also. Don't really talk about the what the reduction has really cost to them. So
Thanks, Joffrey. Okay, any comments, questions on the West Side Career Counselors program review?
Go ahead, Bjorn.
First off, I was really impressed, especially with the answers to 1 and 2 and the attachment of supplemental. That really helped me. It was, I thought it was well done. Something in question 6 made me wonder if West Side Career Counselors receives any funding from non-S&A sources, if at all. I mean, not necessarily salient to our purpose, but and also I would track non-student participation because they said they have to accommodate anybody who comes in, whether that's tracked or not.
And I can tell you, yes, they do get non-S&A funding. I did really like their supplemental information as well, especially the breakdown that it had of the contacts. As someone who likes data, I liked it because it gave me the unique student ID and what type of contact some of those other non-unique ones were, and a lot of the demographics on the students coming in and what services they were coming in focused on. So I really appreciated that, and I'm glad that they're looking at that information that they're pulling there. And I did make note on that note, the one area where they had noted that the CW advising notes where they get some information doesn't allow them to do that, but they're trying to work with IS to be able to make sure they can get demographic information, which I think will just help to further strengthen and showing the students that they're working with.
Bjorn?
Also just occurred to me. Question 9, they answered it in a speculative fashion, but I was wondering, they mentioned worst case scenario potential removal of the goods and services budget. I checked back through the funding, and they had a goods and services budget of, or goods and services expenditure of around $7,000 a year before the spending freeze. 2021 was an anomaly, and I was just interested in what the removal of that 7K odd would do. It's a worst case scenario, but I was curious.
Just curious what that actual impact would be. No, it's a valid question.
Yeah, they broke down goods and services on the funding statement, but I couldn't actually find the approved base funding allocation for this quadrennial. So I wasn't quite sure what to do.
I think when you go to it, just, and this is a reference for, when you go on the website to the base funding for this cycle, and it gives you the document that's the justification. In that document, if you click on, there's links internally in the document that take you to the full base funding request, which I can take a look after this meeting to make sure that that one is accessible specifically. Other feedback, questions for Westside Career Counselors? Awesome. We'll jump over to Central News Watch. Like I mentioned earlier, these ones are all going to be different, and you can see some of the differences with this program and how they can and can't collect data and information given it's a different type of program and service. Bjorn?
I apologize for asking so many questions, but I also shouldn't apologize. So I'm sorry, I'm self-conscious. My first question was kind of how CNW intersects with other student journalism programs, because I know there's some level of cooperation, but I don't know what kind of cooperation. That was primarily relevant on question 3. There was some allusion in question 4 to like enrollment, and I wasn't sure if there was a class required to, like a class in the communication department or something tied to Central News Watch. That I just was a little bit fuzzy on. They mentioned digital engagement metrics on like Facebook on question 2, and that seemed relevant for question 6. They also mentioned a bunch of other social networks that didn't have metrics attached quite yet that I was interested in seeing more of. They mentioned melding the manager and the department secretary, and I was wondering if they had any progress on hiring, because they said their secretary is about to leave. Wondering how that was going. They mentioned that they had budget cuts this year, but a lot of those were absorbed by income. This isn't necessarily within the bounds of the question, but like next year, once they have full staffing, how are the budget cuts going to affect them then? Because this year was sort of an anomaly, assuming that the budget cuts continue at similar levels. And I was kind of wondering what's the legal red tape around using I'm sorry, a little bit off track, around using money for like competitions, because like, is that something we specified, or I'm just curious about that particular caveat. That was on question 10, I think. Yeah.
I see Judy and Sean's hands up as well. So Judy can go first and then Sean.
Yeah, if Sean, did you have a clarifying point or anything? If you want to go first so you can address anything you're clarifying, go for it.
Okay, I'm not gonna speak for Joey here, but I know on the question that you had about the Central News Watch is tied to a class. Because of collaboration we're doing with them now, I do know that that is true. So it's like a kind of like an internship model type class where you can get credits based on the amount of hours you work and stuff like that. So that one for sure, I know it is technically a class, but also kind of an organization at the same time.
Yeah, it becomes one, and I'm just clarifying. I know you have your question, Judy. It becomes one with that that they do the class. However, the production of Central News Watch is outside of that, and this is where Lacey can give more specifics on it because I may mix up my student media budgets as I'm not looking at it. But most of the student media are similar in that sense, and that the hours the students get paid are the after course credit hours that are tied within that. We tend to be very specific with that.
Okay, thank you. Thought I remembered that from last year, but wasn't sure.
Alrighty, so my question is, it's kind of like a statement question, but just, yeah, I would have, to do with like, different news sources on campus, I would have liked to see like, them kind of talk more about what distinguishes them from the Observer or even like KCWU, right? Because I can tell that there is a difference, right? Like it's a course, it has credits, but at the same time, I would have liked to see that like reflected specifically in their paperwork and say that we're different from KCW because we're different from, like listing all different news sources and listing that, because I feel like it would be valuable to see that distinction so that we can really kind of like have a better, broader idea of, all those different entities and how they kind of work together, but like in separate ways, if that makes sense, to inform students of things going around on campus. So.
That was great. Well, and this may be a question for Lacey because I do have it on here. And I don't know if it's tied to Central News Watch's budget, but it's a part that I know in the past, and this is where me being here too long becomes a problem, that the position they're referring to in question number 8, as Kate's position, who handled the management of those pieces, had some funding from S&A within that. I know this came up with a couple of the budgets when we did base funding previously. I know the part we'll need to follow up on is if there is base funding from S&A going towards the position and they're wanting to merge it with the department secretary job, there's pieces we need to follow up on to ensure whether or not that's allowable. But I don't remember if we are no longer funding it too.
So there is a position, or it's partial funded from the Observer. So different base funding.
And so we'll probably have that similar piece come up when the Observer does when we go through their program review. But something that we'll want to probably follow up on with the department just to ensure the funding is being used on what it can be used for. Other feedback, questions with Central News Watch? Okay. We'll go ahead and jump over to Diversity and Equity Center. So feedback, questions from DEC's program review.
Bjorn?
Yeah, just a basic one on question 9. What needs to happen to rehire or get a new a program manager? Because it needed some kind of approval or something. My other question, and this might be a reading comprehension question on my end, the cuts mentioned in 9 those are this year as a result of the S&A removing some of the base funding across the board, right? Question 9 isn't a forecast in this case, is it?
That's one of those we would clarify. I believe you're correct, Bjorn, that it's what they're sharing. I'm not reading it as, and based on a few of the things I know in there, I believe those are things that have taken place this year, not necessarily forecasted. And I see Lacey's nodding her head yes, so yeah.
That was what I was afraid of.
I'm not sure. I was one of the collaborative partners for an event they did this year, so I'm not sure if I need to abstain from commentary, but I can provide clarity on that if needed. Is that okay? Okay, I'm getting it. Deanna's nodding her head. Okay, cool. Just wanted to make sure. But yeah, so all of these, from what I can tell, I can't speak for the collaborative, but the signature program and the graduation celebrations, that yeah, that's all from, assuming it follows with those two things, then that's all from this year.
Well, if it isn't the consequences of my own actions.
I know we touched on this, but I know one of the things I want to note here, and we talked about with the others, is they had mentioned just kind of the limitations that Presence has. Because I really liked the amount of info they gave in question 6 about the breakdown of the students they have it. However, I would really like to know that, because that was the total attendees, not unique students, because they touch on that in question 7. And so it would have been helpful to know, out of those 880 unique students, what was the breakdown on there. Because I think that becomes challenging when you have students who come multiple times, that inflates some of those demographic numbers. And so it's hard to know the true breakdown of that. But I did like their graphs and the information they provided on there. I think, not that they didn't want to provide it, I think the limitations of that program have come up in a couple of these for sure. Oh, Judy.
Oh, good. Yeah, and just to speak a little bit to those limitations, like under question 6, under the race category, I feel like that's a huge deal that it doesn't have the category of Latinx, Chicanx, or Hispanic. Like, that is a major population at this university. So for us to use a program that doesn't include it as an option, while also, like, it should have a diverse set of options that includes, a major population. So I do think that we should really assess, maybe try and encourage, trying to find a different program, or, encourage them, maybe submit some sort of patch note or something to say, please add this, because why isn't it there, frankly, but that's just kind of a little commentary on Presence for you.
And I can share just with this group that I know that program is being looked at and reviewed, just in general. And so this information and feedback is stuff, and Greg turns his camera on and nod his head. This is stuff that most people are aware of who are reviewing it, but I'm making sure they get this feedback as well. So hopefully we'll have something new coming up in the next program reviews, or in the near future with them. Other feedback or questions on the DEC program review? Great. We'll switch gears. And again, as we talked about, completely different type of program. We're going to jump over to Early Childhood Learning Center, our ECLC program review. Feedback, questions, responses?
I have something for number 4. I think it was it's for number 6. They did mention that they serve students, staff, and faculty parents. And I know, okay, yeah, they did mention in number 7 that they serve student parents like 75 to 100, but I think it'd be important to kind of know how many staff, how many faculty, parents, especially knowing based on everything that they mention, it is obviously very important, especially being a student and a parent. So I think that would be important numbers to just really advocate for them.
No, that's great feedback, Andrea. And I had similar with that, and also asking because they touch on in question 6 that the parents and identifies they're 0 to low income, majority single family, and so gives a general sense of the demographics. But I know it's mentioned in question 7 that the form gathers some of that more specific info, and so I think it'd be helpful at least have the percentage base, so we can look and see. I know it's a group of about 100, but to know what that looks like. Bjorn?
Yeah, in connection with that, I was interested. They mentioned student parents served. I was interested if they currently served any faculty or staff parents, and if so, if we could get the numbers from that. It was just kind of an addition. On question 8, they mentioned classified positions, and I wasn't sure if that was like classified in the sense that I'm not allowed to know it, or a different kind of classified. And I guess I was just curious, they mentioned they had 2 sites in question 11, like where those sites were, which campuses, because I know there's one in like Arc building, but.
So I'll touch on both of those, Bjorn. Now you've completely changed the way I'm going to think when I hear classified positions, just so you know. And same with Lacey and Peggy, because I see them respond. So classified depends on the classification from an FLSA labor piece that they're essentially they get overtime eligible, those types of pieces. And so you can know what they are, but they're specific types of positions fall into classified versus exempt are the other types of positions that are there. And their 2 locations are actually both here in Ellensburg. It's only Ellensburg based. The one that you're talking about that's in, and it's connected to the art building, but it's actually right next door to it. And it's where the our EMS and our early childhood learning program is located. That's the Rainbow Center, which is 6 months to 2 years old, if I remember correctly. And then the main ECLC location is out in Brook Lane Village, and that is 3 up to grade school ages that are at that location. Other feedback or questions about the ECLC program review? I think the only part I'll add in here, because I did want to highlight, I did appreciate on question 2 that they have a number of ways that they assess and that those assessments look like they tied to it. I don't know if it'd be relevant for the committee. Those are always things I would like to know. I'm like, that's great you're asking, because there's a ton of different ways they do it, which is great to get that feedback. And so I just wanted to highlight that as a positive feedback. Okay, let's jump over to KCWU FM radio program review. Comments, feedback, questions?
Kind of the same thing that I mentioned for the last one. They didn't really provide details on what, like, yes, students from all majors, faculty and staff know who they are and everything, but like how, I don't know, just kind of provide some insight of, like, I'm sure like we know, like we listen to the radio, whatever, but it would be good to like see how they think they're reaching out and how it's like paying off.
Bjorn?
Definitely seconding Andrea's comment. I know they can't track through FM, but they had a bunch of other ways that they could theoretically track. The other one was the brand manager they mentioned. That's not covered by S&A, correct? Because I was a little fuzzy. It was on questions 9 and 10, if that helps.
So, no, that is not funded by S&A.
Other feedback on there, and I think that's good, valid feedback. I know we all kind of talked about. I'd say this is similar to the Central News Watch in terms of we know that there's no way to catch all, because really when you're talking who gets the service, it's going to be out there in a way that you can't always access or know. Especially when we're talking FM radio, you don't know how many people within some of that, but we can definitely ask for some more info or details. Oh, Bjorn.
Yeah, it just occurred to me, same question as for Central News Watch, like collaboration with other news organizations. I was just interested in that.
Any other feedback or questions on KCWU? Awesome. Well, and I said this last week. I realized I didn't say it this week, so I'll say it right now, and I'll remind you again at the end. If you all think of other questions or feedback afterwards, you can send that to me, and I'll compile that again at the end of our program reviews when we send feedback out. So don't feel like if all of a sudden something popped into your head, or as we're looking at other program reviews, similar, it may pop back and like, hey, that is a good question. That should go back and also apply to this program review we looked at earlier. We can definitely do those. So, but on that note, we'll jump to the next one, the Lion Rock Visiting Writer Series. So feedback, questions.
Bjorn?
Go ahead, Bjorn.
A point of clarification, I was kind of wondering, in number 10, they mentioned department-based, college-based, and Sadie Thayer funds. Are those a case-by-case basis, or are they annual? I just want to see what kind of funding is coming in, because they had Thayer funds left over, but I wasn't sure if that was an annual thing or not. I think yeah. And it was also just that, can they check demographics of attendees, if that's at all possible? I totally understand if it isn't, but it's come up a lot, I guess.
Yeah, I think that was one I had with them. And again, this is going to be with several others, is just that question about tracking the number of unique students. Because again, we want to know how many individual students are benefiting or utilizing these programs. And I know some are able to do that currently and some aren't. And so I think that's feedback we can give in general, is asking the question, is there a way of tracking and getting that information? And if not, to at least ask them to provide that. Here's why we can't do that, or it wouldn't be feasible, so we know in a general sense.
Greg?
So just to throw it out there, I mean, maybe, or is there a way that this committee or S&A could fund, support all of these various programs that we want to know the student number? I mean, to put it on each department like Lion Rock, it's difficult for them because of who runs that program and the time they have to even figure out the technology to do it. But maybe there's a way that we can invest some money that then can be used for the various programming, and then we could really have accurate numbers on our student population. And I mean, the other thing I like thinking about the community garden and stuff is that there is community involved. I mean, if you looked at the numbers, and that's a good thing too. I mean, especially, you know, just recent conversations with our new president. I mean, he's trying to figure out how do we better engage the community, and maybe S&A funds isn't the right point for that, but I think that's something that the university as a whole is thinking about. So maybe that's not a bad thing either.
Go ahead, Bjorn.
I definitely second what Greg said. I don't want to put all of the burden on the funding areas to provide their metrics to us. And certainly qualifiable data is important as well as quantifiable data. Would such a tracking process, would that fall under like support services or the administrative support costs, or okay, no, it would not. Would it fall under whoever's going to replace presence with something useful? No offense to presence.
I would jump in on that and say that what we have found is presence doesn't do exactly what we were hoping. And so there are limitations, which I think the base funded areas have done a great job at showing us what those limitations are. But I do believe that we do still have a software. And so when we're talking about other departments that maybe don't have a tracking ability, we do have a software that S&A actually already pays for. So that is paid for out of the SLICE departments. And so again, it is base funded. And I would urge the committee to really think about it, even though we know that there's some limitations, that it could be something that the committee says, you know, as these student programs go through, if we can keep tracking them through presence, we can still get data dumped. And if that software does change in the future, then we could insert that software's name as well.
Thank you, Lacey.
Just one other thought then is that if there is a scanner, if there's a gun, if there's something that works with whatever this software is, let's supply that to these various areas. And then it makes it easy. Then we can have those numbers we want. And yeah.
Go ahead, Greg.
It could be as simple as just assigning a QR code to every event or every activity and scanning that with a phone when you go to that event or activity. You know, just would have to be, we would have to have a software and a system that would allow us to do that. Other campuses have that, we do not. It's a little spendy, but it gives you the data that you're looking for.
But is that relying on the student to scan when they enter?
Yeah, it's the participant to scan when they enter, you know.
So that, I mean, that might be an issue. I mean, you know, most of these events have could have somebody at the door or something else where give them a device. Maybe it's just is a phone. I don't know.
Yeah.
But.
And some events, individuals aren't comfortable being tallied, being accounted for with demographics and such. So you run into that as well, which is understandable at selected events, I think.
Bjorn?
Yeah, there's I definitely like having more data, but I also want to like note that not all programs can effectively gather that in some capacity. So like I want to strike a good balance between qualified and quantified feedback, and I want to encourage the former as much as the latter as necessary. Like, yeah.
Well, and I appreciate you said that, Bjorn, because I think there is a balance. As we've talked about a number of times, these programs are all different and these services are all different. And so we're not going to be able to find, even when we talked about what are the questions for these program reviews. I think the admin fee last week was a great example of not everything is going to be applicable or fit. But I do think encouraging those that can use similar means to utilize that. And it definitely sounds like there's support from the committee this year, for sure. And I would imagine, and this has been in the past too, of supporting if we were to move forward with what Dean Heinzelman was sharing on there, of having a program like that that could cost some money, could be something S&A in the future could assist with funding. So, but with that, we have the note made about the info, and we'll bring it up with the others too. Any others though with Lion Rock before we jump to the next one? Okay, so we'll go to the next one. So this one, Menashdash program review.
I would just like to say that I personally feel like there wasn't very much information anywhere. And a lot of the questions, I feel like there should have been more clarification pretty much in every question. So, yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with Andrea. Given the past program reviews that we've seen have been more comprehensive than this one. So we'd probably have to get someone to come in or more clarification with all the answers. Judy?
Yeah, I want to add to that. I looked it up and I honestly couldn't even tell it was a journal until I looked them up and found them on the CWU website. And then I also noticed that at least via the website, I don't know if they have ways for students to submit things in person or how that goes, but there just wasn't a lot of clarification, right, on how they're getting this student input. And so I was a little concerned as to, like, they do like annual volumes and everything, and I get that, but there isn't any information on deadlines and when students need to submit things by. And I just, I was a little concerned as to whether this is truly open to all students if it's not clearly outlined, because I think this is a valuable resource for students to have, but there just needs to be a more outlined process. And again, like you both are saying, yeah, there just needs to be more clarification. So,
yeah, I think especially with their mission or vision, raising diverse voices and empowering marginalized students and everything, I think that we should be concerned why there isn't more. And I will pass it off to Bjorn.
Yeah, I definitely noticed the brevity of the responses. In particular, I was interested because on question 3 they said that it intersects with like all the programs. I was interested in like more specifics, like the ones that they interact with most, and kind of details of those interactions. I figured it would be different literature focused programs, but who knows. They also, I mean, they had difficulty tracking. I'd imagine they would have difficulty tracking like demographics of who picks up a magazine from a newsstand, but I was interested in seeing like how many student staff they have, potentially the demographics said student staff, who's benefiting from like the production experience as well as the media consumers.
Well, I'd say even going beyond that, Bjorn, not just the staff, but the information about the students who submit, because there's the students who put together the journal, but then there's also the students who are the ones who submitting the works to it, which is information they would have. So it sounds like, and I've heard at least 2 of you say this, so I want to clarify, that this would probably be one that we would like to ask them to come in person so we can ask for some more information. Is that correct? I see some nodding. Okay. I will reach out and get them on our upcoming meeting to ask to come in. So at this point, we'll leave the rest of this program review where it is, because we will have that with them directly and ask them questions. So awesome. And with that, we will move on then to the marching band program review.
Bjorn?
They mentioned a 5-year goal to make it like 70% non-music majors. I was just interested in seeing the progress toward that. It also wasn't present on the further improvements question. I was wondering if it was just, you know, missed or whatnot. The other one, I was a little confused at the wording on question 10, because they're no longer able to use funds for outside services / employees that specifically impact student learning and overall production. I was wondering if that was some kind of new legal caveat, something that S&A introduced, or if I just have lost the ability to read.
You know, you haven't lost the ability to read. That one, Bjorn, is specifically, it's not a piece that it talks about that we can't fund services, outside service or employees who impact student learning and overall production. There were other pieces, if I'm remembering correctly, and Lacey may be able to add on there, with the positions they were proposing to fund that had nothing to do with the way this is worded, but that wouldn't necessarily have been an allowable use of S&A funds. But you did read it correctly in there. I just happen to know what that is in reference to.
I think for me on question 7, where with the metrics that they use to count how many students utilize this program, I think it's just a bit vague when it says it is estimated that 5,000 unique students utilize this.
Well, and I'd agree with you on that, Deanna, especially because even following the math of this, and I know I get more into this probably than any of you want me to, and Lacey rolls her eyes at me all the time when I talk about this type of data. But when they talk about 5,000 students, if we have 800 students at a home game, those 800 would be unique. But then the way the math is doing is assuming we have 800 new students at each of those games and an additional 1,000 students who utilize it. So the hard part I have is I get where their info is, an estimated 5,000 students utilize. I wouldn't say unique within that because, and again, I'm speculating here, but I can tell you from going to those games, you have a lot of students who go to multiple games or all of the games within that. So I appreciate the data and they gave the rationale behind where it came from. I think it's maybe flawed data in terms of unique though.
Would this include also West Side students or just students on campus here in Ellensburg? Lacey?
Yeah, so Deanna, I think that would be a hard question to answer for theirs, only because it doesn't look like they have a lot of metrics on who attended the games. But I would say the games are open to West Side students or center students, so they could potentially have come to those games. But I would say we could try and reach out to either Wildcat Tickets, our ticketing department, or the athletic department to see if there was any information, or maybe that's something we could suggest to the marching band director to see if there was any data. We might be lacking some demographics, but it would be interesting to see if there was any further information of who attended those games.
Thank you, Lacey.
Any other feedback or questions other than it sounds like just kind of some more information and clarification on maybe the data regarding the number of students and some of the demographics there? Anything else with marching band?
Just a random thought that I like to throw out here once in a while, but just thinking about like numbers, right? I mean, so 8,000 or 14 students at the Garden. I mean, so there's this broad range. What are we looking for in numbers? Does that mean that we're not going to fund the Garden anymore and we're only going to fund the larger events? And so like, what's the value? I mean, and I'm also thinking like, you know, what is the value of knowing these numbers for us?
I mean, I can give you my take on it, Greg.
Yeah.
I don't think it would be that clean cut because again, we're comparing apples and kiwis, right? Like they're very different programs. I think the part where it would be beneficial, and I'm now jumping ahead in several years, when we get to the next base funding cycle is depending on what the reality is we're looking at. I think having that info will give that committee more data to make some of those decisions, because I don't think in a general sense that we would look at it that way. But I also think even the example you use, the community garden gets a very small budget comparatively. But I think if we had to look at where things are, that would allow the committee to say where our priorities are. And if we have two programs that are the same, but one is only serving 15 students and this budget, and it's maybe a duplicate program, the other one's serving 8,000 students and the same budget, that may have an impact then when we're looking at the part. But I think right now it's getting as much data and as much data that is over the course of all 4 years, so we can see what is the impact that our funding is having, is the way I view it. But again, it's so hard if you try and compare these because the programs aren't going to be comparable, which goes back to, for those who were on the committee when we did the base funding, this goes back to the challenge we had when we had people wanting specific metrics on how are you going to rank and assess every program to determine if they're going to get the funding fully or what it is. And it's so hard because they're not always going to be the same. And so that's where these questions are trying to gather as much info so the committee in the future can know within it. But I see Bjorn has his hand up.
I do share some of Greg's concerns. I guess that, well, we discussed this before, but I guess I'm concerned that, excuse me, in the future, programs which find it more difficult to collect empirical data may get kind of unfairly sidelined. I guess it's the more data is always good, competing with how do we collect data that's helpful and avoid giving into like a hugely positivist approach. I don't have a solution. I'm merely voicing my internal struggles over this.
Yeah, I agree. I don't have a solution, and I don't know what's even better. I mean, even thinking about unique students, right? You know, the ones that go to the games, right? So there's 8,000, but really there's only 2,000 unique students. But is that a problem? Because they're individual events. Each game is a different event. So isn't it okay to count those students again? So, but just thinking about some of the lower attended things that maybe are really adding so much to the campus, even though they're not highly attended, but in other ways of what they might do, it could be of a value. And I just want to know if Joey likes kiwis or if that was really a cut on kiwis. But
I just didn't want to use the normal apples and oranges, so I picked a different, just to change it up. I do like kiwis though, unrelated. Well, and I'll say this because I know we're going a little off topic of the marching band specifically, but I think this is important conversation because what you all are doing is honestly highlighting to me why this is important. Because keep in mind, you are asking these questions and concerned about what this would look like. This would all be decided by a group who is you all. And so you all having those questions and looking like, hey, yes, we get that, but we don't want it to be based on that. We want to make sure that we're looking at those. I think that's the other part too, as we look at next year's program reviews. Are there other questions that we can ask to get at what you were just saying, Greg? Like, again, there may be low attendance, but when we talk about numbers, there's really only the 2 questions about numbers on here. And I would hope, and I would advise and encourage that the committee in the future shouldn't make decisions solely based on those 2 things, without looking at all those other parts about how does this impact students, what is the benefit, all those aspects of it. But that's good as we're going through this, that maybe there's other things we should be asking or collecting to help tell a larger picture, tell the whole story. So I appreciate the conversation.
Yeah, no, it's good. And I mean, and the other thing I see, and there's no answer to this, but it's that some funded units have been doing this for a long time. It's the same person. They're really great at filling out these forms and answering these questions. And then there's others, like maybe Monastash, that I think is probably doing some really great things, but they just don't know how to fill out that form very well. You know, so, but it'll be good. Let's get them here and talk to them, right? So that's, I think, would be positive.
Nope, I agree. And that's also why the benefit of doing this over those 4 years, because that's always my worry too, is base funding is a one request. Well, if Bjorn's amazing at writing requests and I'm awful at it, is that really going to mean he's going to get funded better than me? So again, yep, we'll invite him in. But circling back, other comments, questions, feedback regarding the marching band program review? Seeing none, I'll move on to our last one for tonight, Museum of Culture and Environment. Go ahead, Bjorn.
I was just interested, they noted that some of the visits are related to faculty taking their classes or like a recommendation to go to the museum. I was just interested in seeing the numbers for that, if that's available.
Judy?
Yeah, I wanted to have a comment on question 7. They say that they don't have a way to track repeat visitors or even, just generally track their visitors. And I was just curious why they don't use presence or anything to kind of check visitors in. Because I get having an open format and everything, but having these metrics is kind of important. So that's just something I feel like we could kind of point out and say, hey, why don't you check visitors in? Or, maybe it's not like a ticket system, but kind of similar, just checking in.
I think that's a good observation, Judy, because I know they note in here that we're prevented from getting exact data because it would be disruptive to the museum experience to ask them if they're a student. However, I think this is some of when we give the general feedback as well, that we'll put out from the committee, that again, the committee is hoping and looking for this, and that I do want some of these areas who aren't aware that we have presence to know, because I can't guarantee, but I would suspect that we have a lot of programs, especially those outside of student success, who don't know that we have this present software and what it can do within it. Now, that may still not work with the flow of things here. Like I can say that would probably still be disruptive to have them come and checking compared to just walking in and doing the tally of that. But if they don't know, they can't think of ways to potentially incorporate it.
Right. And they wouldn't necessarily have to just use presence. I mean, there's thousands of check-in softwares. They could just use anything to just say, it could even just say, are you a student or a faculty member, and just have them maybe like a little kiosk or something, right? Like just something to kind of get that metric in.
Oh, numbers. I don't know. But Judy, have you been to the museum?
I have, yeah.
What's that?
I have, yeah.
Yeah. So the big doors, you walk in and the desk is way over here. So it's sometimes not an easy interaction, and it would take a lot of physical sense of moving it around. Maybe it's possible, but I think it's also like Joey said, I think maybe these, like maybe they don't know there's any resource for them to use. And so if this is something important for the S&A, we should probably be supporting that more. That's all.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I mean, they could just have a little sign in because it's a pretty big entryway. Just have a little sign in the middle that says check in at the front desk and then, yeah, and then explore what software to use. Oh, totally. Like, I totally get that it's difficult when you're focusing on museum studies to worry about, tech things and metrics. So,
Other feedback or questions on the museum? Awesome. So I'll leave it at that. Again, if you think of anything later on, don't hesitate to email me. Again, we'll have another series of these coming up. Again, we're meeting every 2 weeks. And so timing wise, I know some of these we spent more time on and some of them went a little bit quicker. I think we're going to see that with the others as well as we go through the others, and it'll be roughly the same amount at our next 2 meetings, along with the addition of inviting the NASDAQ to come. And I'd probably let you on, just for planning sake, and probably plan for that to be no more than 10 minutes of them hearing us asking kind of questions on the program review. Because I'll preface them that we'd like them to come because the committee had some questions and felt that the program review was lacking in information. And so hopefully they will come with this information better prepared to it. But other than that, any feedback, anything from you all? Again, I sent you the tentative last week on which program reviews we'll look at next week on that end. But any questions for me? Yeah, Bjorn?
Toward the end of the year, could we send in suggestions for base funding review questions for next year, like kind of fling a light into the future style?
Yep, that was my plan, is once we do that last set of program reviews, because then we've seen them all, is if there's any on the top of our mind, but also that we can send them electronically so I can share them with the committee next year on, hey, here's what we used. Here's some recommendations after reviewing all these the committees had, and then they may come up with new ones, right, depending on what's going on. But I would absolutely love the recommendations from you all. Well, if nothing else, then I'll pass it back to you, Deanna.
Thank you, Joey. We can move on to public comment. Second call for public comment if there are any. I see the Publicity Center.
Hi, this is Lola Gallagher. It's been really interesting to listen in on these program reviews for the last couple of times. And one thing that has struck me that's come up multiple times is presence as a tracking tool, students' attendance and participation, and some of the challenges with that program, particularly around demographics and also like the lack of knowledge across campus about this specific platform. And I just wanted to mention that when that program was implemented, the initial purpose for it was for a clubs and organizations tool. And it just sort of brings to light, at least for me, that there's a desire for that to be a broader application across campus, to really be a tool for seeing what students are interested in and engaging with. I loved Greg's comment about, just because maybe there's fewer people attending a specific event, that doesn't necessarily diminish the importance of that event. And given the challenges that have come up with some of the limitations of presence specifically, I love the idea of maybe looking at and supporting another platform that does more for more people. And if there is one that is specifically for clubs and organizations, to not have them be mutually exclusive. I mean, really define what is the purpose of the platform. If it's really to be a tool specifically for clubs and organizations, then have it be that. And if there is a tool that needs to be for a broader campus application, to look at that. So my 2 cents.
Thank you, Willa. Is there any other public comments to be made? Seeing none, we can move to adjournment. Can I entertain a motion?
Motion to adjourn.
Motion by Judy. Is there a second? I think I see, yeah, Rehan's hand is up, so seconded by Rehan. All those in favor of adjourning tonight's meeting? All opposed? Any abstentions? I'm assuming Andrea's hand is just there. Motion passes. So many people came back in. 9, thank you, Joey. 900. This meeting is adjourned at 6:52 p.m. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all. Have a great night. Have a great 2 weeks. Bye.